in these types of cases, when they are counterintuitive, they require clinical expertise, and they may involve psychological child abuse. Number one, these cases are counterintuitive. If you have a child rejecting and resisting a relationship with a parent, and if that parent, for example, was previously loved prior to the divorce or the separation, then we're dealing with a counterintuitive problem. You cannot just apply logic and intuition to solve it. Imagine this scenario. You have a rejected mother, okay? The child leaves mother, doesn't want to spend time with mother, and in fact, everyone in the entire neighborhood knows. What did that mother do to drive her child away? What did the mother do to cause the child to reject and resist a relationship? Not only does that create shame in the rejected parent and as if they've done something to cause the resistance or refusal when it may or may not be the case, but it also creates a false belief that this is a problem between a child and a parent, when in actuality there are likely a variety of reasons why a child is resisting and refusing a relationship with one parent. So it's counterintuitive because you cannot just apply reunification therapy or reintegration therapy or whatever kind of conjoint therapy between the rejected parent and the child to solve the problem. That's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Instead, a person needs to use a more counterintuitive approach. They need to not just use their logic, intuition, and decide, okay, this is how you solve it, put the two people in a therapeutic environment. Au contraire. There needs to be an entire family systems solution because the problem is likely related to both parents and of other variety of factors. So that's why these cases are counterintuitive. Let me give you an example also of counterintuitive that comes from the medical model. So 50 years ago in the 1970s, children were diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? ADHD. And so the MDs are scratching their heads like, how do we solve this problem? Let's use a counterintuitive solution and prescribe Ritalin. That's a stimulant, right? It's counterintuitive to apply a stimulant to the medical solution for a child who's bouncing off the walls, right? You would think that you would give something that would calm the child down. That's a counterintuitive solution to a problem. Similarly, in family law, you have a resist-refuse dynamic. People think, just like they think applying a calming effect to a child with ADHD would calm the child down, they think putting a child in the room with a therapist and the rejected parent's going to solve the problem, and it doesn't. In fact, it could make the issue worse, and I can explain more about that another time. It's outside the scope of this conversation. However, the family law matters that involve resist-refuse dynamics have a second component that makes them difficult to litigate, and that is that they are clinical. When a child is resisting and refusing the relationship with a parent or a caregiver that is unjustified, for example, or has no legitimate reason, then there needs to be a therapist who has clinical expertise in how to not only identify the reasons why this child is perhaps resisting and refusing a relationship, but also can properly apply the remedies through the use of appropriate therapy. So one of the things I say to people when we are looking at a clinical solution is we need a mental health professional or more than one to be involved in this case to evaluate the problems and to create the solutions. So an example of that is I'm going to use a medical model again. Let's say we had a heart patient, somebody that had a heart problem that needed heart surgery, okay? You're going to go to a heart surgeon to perform the heart surgery. You're not going to go to a general practitioner or ear, nose, and throat doctor. Similarly, in therapy, not all therapists are alike. You have therapists that have the clinical expertise to be able to handle resist-refuse cases, and if they don't, they can actually do more harm than good. How can therapy do more harm, you ask? Here's how. If a child, for example, is being used as a ventriloquist, like we talked about earlier, A parent can be coaching a child into making allegations against the other parent. Therapists are trained to believe the voice of the child. So if a child goes into a therapist's office, oh, let's say my parent A abused me, or parent B abused me, how'd they abuse you? And then the child starts to describe the abuse. If the allegation of abuse is not credible, and you have a therapist who is untrained and cannot determine that the allegation is not credible, then that therapist can actually create false memories of abuse in that child. What do you mean? A false memory or a confabulation is very possible with young, impressionable children. Why? Because children are trained from a very young age, especially in school, that if an adult or a person in authority asks them a question and they get the question wrong, then they're going to ask, the parent or the adult will ask that child again. And children go around, they watch other children in the classroom raise their hand, oh, I have the answer. And they watch teachers ask the same question 3 or 4 times until they get the answer they want. This happens in therapy as well. Well-meaning therapists who do not have clinical expertise in the resist-refuse dynamics that are complicated family law matters may ask a child 3 times whether that child has been abused, and boom, that child will remember some sort of abuse. And then in order to prevent something called splitting, which is a psychological term, it's be outside the scope of this discussion, but in order to prevent dissociation or splitting, a child will then fill in the lines and the color in the lines with regard to the abuse. So they'll create schemas or stories in their brain where they actually create false memories of abuse once they realize they're pleasing the person in authority that's asking them the questions. So it's very dangerous, it can be, to put a child into therapy that requires a clinical solution by someone who's clinically trained in these types of cases, unless that person has the expertise and the knowledge. A third area in which this becomes a difficult type of case to litigate is because these cases can involve psychological child abuse. Okay, so when a child is coached to reject a previously loved parent for no legitimate justification, but because that parent is, the parent who's doing the coaching is angry, dad had an affair, so he's a bad father and he's a jerk and blah, 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 the child who actually had a positive experience with father wants to please the person who is denigrating dad. I'm using dad and mom right now. It could be parent A and parent B. It could be the reverse. This is not gender specific. But let's say that a parent is angry at the other parent, right? So they begin coaching the child to reject the other parent. That is considered psychological child abuse in the literature and among professionals, just as physical abuse, verbal abuse, and sometimes even sexual abuse. So psychological child abuse in the form of telling a child and teaching a child to hate is psychological child abuse, right? And it can be something that should be punishable actually by some of the abuse laws. And so California codified coercive control, which is a form of psychological child abuse, in a recent case, in a recent legislative decision, and has changed our California Family Code so that if a parent is withholding a child from family or others and coercively controlling that child, it can be considered child abuse and subject to action by the bench officers. It's very important that time does not go by. Children age out. Children become 14, 15, 16 years old, and they start to have a say in where they reside. And unfortunately, sometimes these children are coercively controlled or unduly influenced to say, I only want to live in parent A's house. I never want to see parent B again. And it's generally known among professionals and mental health professionals and even in the legal field that children's best interests is to have a relationship with both parents as long as those parents are healthy. So it's critical that if you find that you are involved in a case that has to do with resist-refuse dynamic, you immediately seek help from a person who understands the counterintuitive, clinical, and psychological aspects of these cases. I'm Virginia Griffin of Griffin, Donnell & Associates, and you can contact us at griffindonnell.com.